What is going on, everybody? We are back on Peep This Review Does What If. We're getting super close to the end of all of this. This is episode 7 out of 9. For those of you who have been watching the series, it's been a roller coaster every week. It's been definitely one of the most unique, I think, experiences as far as the MCU has gone in terms of just diving out of even my own comfort zone, right? I've said plenty of times earlier in the recording of these that I've never really super been an animated fan per se. And I'm very shocked at this point, just to admit kind of how invested and how engaged I've been in this show, doing these reviews or not. I think this is some of the most interesting animated content that I've seen as an adult, in quite some time. I'll give a nod to Invincible if you have not checked out yet. That is absolutely an incredible series on Amazon Prime. But as far as animation goes, it is terribly difficult to pull me in. These guys have done it. They did it again this week. Let's talk about it. So this episode is essentially a Loki lacking Thor episode, which is very different for us. It's actually kind of refreshing and very unique what happens to Thor in this episode. Very high-level overview. The topic is essentially, what if Loki was returned to his parentage as opposed to taken in by Odin and becoming a rightful, stepbrother to Thor? And at its surface, you hear this and you're like, okay, what would it be like without Loki? Thor maybe has an easier upbringing. His path to the throne is a bit clearer. And maybe, if anything, he has less hindrance in his way, right? But what you don't really think about is what I think the ultimate goal of this episode ends up being, which is that the relationship that Thor has with Loki and what we know of as our primary timeline in the MCU, right, is one that carried their live action films quite some way, right? So in Thor's origin film, he spends a ton of time really back and forth with Loki. Loki is in essence the villain of his film, and Loki goes on to be the villain of many films. But in those sort of nemesis moments that these two have, in their sort of quarrels and their constant bickering, there's a lot of character growth that happens between the two of those characters, and it's something that you kind of see blossom and really come into a head in maybe Thor Ragnarok, and of course ultimately in Infinity War in that series. But the two characters that are so separate but altogether so close really kind of makes Thor who he is as a character. And I think that in this episode, what they aim to do is much more lighthearted. So what they really end up doing it or showcasing is how, without Loki, Thor almost just becomes sort of like this boisterous, very Tony Stark natured character, which it somehow feels natural while you're watching it, and you feel like, okay, I can see this. This is a Thor that I feel like has been presented to me in such a way that he's kind of had this upbringing of being cocky and arrogant, and he's a party boy. In fact, so much of the episode sort of focuses on him kind of taking or jumping at an opportunity to have this massive blowout party on a planet that his parents will likely not find him on, which he decides is Earth. But his actions throughout the course of this episode, very well choreographed, but also, super Tony Stark feeling. And it fits the character that you see in the show. It feels like it makes sense with where they're going, but it is a tonally different, Loki and Thor in this episode than anything you've ever seen. So where does Loki come in? We said this is sort of a Thor episode. So Loki essentially in this timeline, in this multiverse, he actually has grown up with his frost giant brethren and has become large and blue. And he's showcased during this episode as kind of being almost Avatar-esque in a weird way. But essentially, he shows up to Thor's party that he hosts on Earth, that he invites all these folks to. The Guardians are there. Howard the Duck shows up. It's like anybody who's anybody was at Thor's party, right? And when he holds this party, Jane Foster shows up, and with Kat Dennings' character, whose name always escapes me, Darcy. And basically, they're sort of drawn to this event because they're seeing holy crap, a Norse god just essentially came to Earth out of literally nowhere, and he's throwing a party. This is kind of a big deal. We want to figure that out. And then the opposition in the episode is Shield and Maria Hill, who's actually leading Shield in this timeline, want to go stop the madness that Thor is up to, and they basically sick Carol Danvers on him, and they fight a couple of times, and it's just there's a lot that goes on in this episode, right? I'll say that, but it flows very, very well. It feels like you're kind of bouncing from one little lighthearted beat to another. You're watching Thor be this party animal character, but he's got tensions to deal with. He's got things that arise for him, and it feels altogether self-contained until it doesn't. At the very end of this episode, the episode kind of concludes, with him actually getting prompted to maybe go on a date with Jane Foster as they've gotten closer throughout the episode. And this episode kind of contains that initial bonding that the two of them had, in Thor's origin story in our canon MCU. But they sort of bond throughout the course of the episode, and at the end, it's sort of on a cliffhanger that she's, kind of asking him out. And then right after that, you see what is Ultron, an Ultron that has all of the Infinity Stones and is also occupying Vision's body. And the episode just kind of cuts right there. So another one of those kind of classic, seemingly, what if moments where they kind of stop a story dead in its tracks, and you don't either know where, do we ever pick that back up? Is this over? Is just are these all going to just end with this sort of crazy additional? Yeah, and then what if this happened at the end? It's very it's both crafty and annoying. I think the writing, sometimes it happens here as a viewer. You're like, man, like why would you stop right there? But as the writers, they're giving themselves so much more opportunity to revisit these weird stories in a season 2 or a season 3, or make written material based off of them. There's no real limit to what they can do with What If. And again, I think that's been able to drive a lot of what makes these episodes tick, is just the fact that no bars need to be held. And I think, to wrap this episode up, this episode I do think was very strong. In fact, I'd rate it in my top 3 likely, for a couple of key reasons that we'll just kind of go ahead and peg down. One, the tone. It's very lighthearted. It's very easy to engage with, but very self-contained in some ways. Like I said, until the end. I almost want to treat that little post very end scene as its own thing, because it doesn't really meld with the rest of the episode. The rest of the episode is tonally very fun, and it's altogether pointless, right? There is no huge otherworldly impact other than this Ultron thing at the very end. It just feels lighthearted, and it feels kind of, to me, a lot like the T'Challa is Star-Lord episode. Very self-contained, very fun. And for those reasons, along with some awesome fight scenes and getting to see characters that we don't normally see in an animated setting, I would give this a strong A-. This episode would get an A- from me. But just to wrap this episode up, one more time, guys, just want to shout out, we have 2 more episodes of Peep This Review Does What If. We also have tons more content coming at you from Tonight We Marvel. Please check us out at Tonight We Marvel on YouTube. And again, Black and Marvel, Saturday Night Marvel, 2 awesome shows, and more to come soon, guys. But thank you so much for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next week. Peep out.